From Vermont Public Radio, this is The Frequency. I'm Henry App.
And I'm Anna Van Dyne. It's Wednesday, July 28th. Here are today's headlines.
The Department of Health reported 11 new cases of COVID-19 on Tuesday. 6 people are hospitalized. 83.6% of eligible Vermonters have received at least one dose of a vaccine. The vaccination rate remains lowest for 18 to 21-year-olds at about 50%.
In order to comply with the Global Warming Solutions Act, Vermont must reduce its greenhouse gas emissions dramatically by 2025. This summer, the Vermont Climate Council is working on recommendations for how to do that. Abby Corse is on the council and co-owns Corse Farm Dairy in Whitingham. She says any solutions should prioritize those affected first by climate change and be accessible to all Vermonters.
You have to understand that in order for it to be equitably met, it has to be resourced appropriately.
The group will seek public input in September and is expected to finalize the plan by the end of the year.
Anna, do you remember Rink Inc.?
Of course I remember Rink Inc.
Right. It's the fantastic name of a nonprofit group in the Linden area that started up this year to try to save an ice arena that's been closed since the beginning of the pandemic. Rink stands for Rescue Ice Hockey in the Northeast Kingdom, and their goal is to raise enough money to reopen the Fenton Chester Arena, another great name, and that's the only ice rink in Caledonia County, and to make some repairs to the roof, the bathrooms, the heating system. And this week, the Caledonian Record reported that the group has hit their fundraising goal. They've raised $35,000, and they're hoping to get about $25,000 from the state as well. Rink Inc. is waiting for the Linden Select Board to approve their lease and hopes to reopen the ice rink in October.
Coming up, COVID cases are surging in parts of the country, and there's been an uptick here too. So how is the state responding? We'll ask our colleague Pete Hirschfeld about that after this.
Thanks, VHFA, for supporting The Frequency. VHFA, helping Vermonters achieve homeownership since 1974. To learn more about their unique benefits, visit vhfa.org/homebuyers.
So, as we know, Vermont is doing a pretty good job when it comes to vaccinating residents against COVID-19. The state leads the nation with a vaccination rate just over 83%, which has protected the state from the dramatic spike in cases that other regions of the country are experiencing right now. But we also know that case counts are creeping up here too, even among people who've been fully vaccinated. Governor Phil Scott and his team held a press briefing on Tuesday to talk about the situation, and our colleague Pete Hirschfeld is here to catch us up on what they said. Hey, Pete.
Hello, Anna. Hello, Henry. Thanks for having me on The Frequency.
Of course. So, Pete, daily case counts have been on the rise for about 3 weeks now in Vermont, but we know we have a much higher vaccination rate than other parts of the country that are seeing surges like Missouri and Texas and Florida. So it seems like we're not likely to see those kinds of surges here, but what could we see given the Delta variant right now?
So what we are likely going to see, at least according to the modeling that was presented at this press briefing, is cases in Vermont are going to rise over the course of the summer. And we are looking at modeling right now that shows daily case counts creeping above 50 by the time we get into mid-August. Health Commissioner Mark Levine, Governor Phil Scott say it's extraordinarily unlikely that we'd see the kind of dramatic case spikes in places with lower vaccination rates. Anthony Fauci recently called this latest surge in the U.S. a quote, pandemic of the unvaccinated. And Levine says that's spot on. And he says the fact that 83.6% of eligible Vermonters have now gotten at least one dose of the vaccine is really going to insulate us from the kinds of wild spikes that other less vaccinated states have seen. But, you know, case counts are on the rise in Vermont. That's a reality. And that's not just compared with the low case counts we've seen earlier this summer. I was checking out some data at the Department of Health earlier today, and one stat caught my eye. Over the last 7 days, Henry and Anna, Vermont has reported 141 new cases of COVID-19. And over that same 1 week time period last summer, when the vaccination rate was 0, we only had 40 new cases of COVID-19 reported. And these new cases we're seeing do include people who've been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Over the past 14 days, an average of 5 fully vaccinated people a day have contracted COVID-19. The good news is that if you're fully vaccinated, you're far, far less likely to experience severe outcomes from COVID. But so far in Vermont, 5 fully vaccinated people have been hospitalized due to COVID-19. That's according to Dr. Levine. And he said 1 fully vaccinated person has died of COVID-19.
Well, the other thing that's different from last summer, aside from the fact that we have vaccines now, is that we don't have a mask mandate. We don't have distancing requirements. Governor Phil Scott lifted the state of emergency about a month and a half ago. But is he considering reinstating any of those directives in light of the rising case counts we're seeing?
Definitely not. He was really emphatic about that today, Anna. Reporters asked Phil Scott and Mark Levine both about whether they're considering a return to these COVID mitigation orders that we had for almost 16 months, or I guess more than that even. They both said Vermont's situation isn't close right now to warranting that kind of intervention. And even with the surge in other states, Phil Scott said he is not considering a reintroduction of travel restrictions, for example, on people coming into Vermont from places with very high rates of transmission. The CDC, interestingly, unveiled new guidance that reinstates the recommendation for mask wearing indoors, even among fully vaccinated individuals. But that new guidance only applies to places with high COVID-19 transmission rates, and Mark Levine says Vermont does not fall into that category. What Phil Scott and Mark Levine are pressing hard for still is for unvaccinated Vermonters to get vaccinated. That's become the singular focus of their COVID communication strategy, and they say that vaccines and vaccines alone are the only thing that's going to protect Vermonters against this highly transmissible Delta variant.
Well, speaking of vaccines, Pete, we've seen some other parts of the country this week require government employees to get vaccinated. That's the case in New York City as well as California, or else they'll face regular COVID testing. Is that something that's on the table for the Scott administration? Would they make a similar move for state employees here in Vermont?
A hard no from Governor Phil Scott on that today. He said he's heard the news that other states are going to be requiring this of government workers, either proof of vaccination or regular testing, I think is what's been instituted in California and New York. Governor Scott said, we're doing so well with vaccination rates here in Vermont already that he doesn't think that measure is going to be necessary for government workers in Vermont. And as of right now, at least, he says he has no plans to have any kind of vaccination requirement for government workers looking to return to the office in person.
And finally, Pete, summer is speeding by very quickly and the start of school is just around the corner. The CDC is recommending a mask mandate for unvaccinated students when K-12 schools return. Do we know whether Vermont students will be required to wear masks when they go back to the classroom?
So we don't know the answer to that question right now, Anna, but it sounds like we will know the answer to that question after next Tuesday's briefing. Health Commissioner Mark Levine said he and Education Secretary Dan French are planning to unveil the administration's recommendations for K-12 schools in Vermont next week. They've previously said that the question of whether or not schools will have a mask mandate this fall is going to be a function of where we're at in terms of viral transmission in the state. They haven't said what levels of community spread would spur them to impose a mask mandate. It's worth noting that Vermont leads the nation in the percentage of 12 to 16-year-olds that have been vaccinated against COVID. That's more than 63% of 12 to 16-year-olds right now that have at least one shot. Keep in mind, though, that no one under 12 years of age has been vaccinated, and there are a lot of parents that have some concerns about sending their unvaccinated children unmasked into classrooms. What Mark Levine and Dan French have both made very clear is that the primary objective is a return to full-time in-person instruction this fall. And they've said everything in the COVID guidance that we'll see next week is going to be geared at facilitating that outcome.
All right, that's Pete Hirschfeld. Pete, thanks so much.
Thank you both.
And Henry, today is Wednesday, which means it's Wildlife Wednesday. And we got this sound from a listener last week. It came to us with the subject line, Wildlife Wednesday Mystery Sound. The listener is Benjamin Desbois, and he recorded this in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And he didn't know what it was.
but we looked it up. And according to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, we're pretty darn sure it's a blue-headed vireo, which is a small bird whose range includes the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Also Vermont, according to this map. So in theory, you could find some up here. So we think that's your bird, Benjamin. And also thanks for listening to the podcast. Benjamin's a dear friend of mine.
And thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Abigail Giles and Jane Lindholm.
Our executive producer is Mark Davis, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Henry Epp.
And I'm Anna Van Dyne. Talk to you tomorrow.
All I know about the blue-headed vireo is that it's a neotropical migrating songbird. It's found in both North and Central America.
Oh, how did you find this out?
Yes. Your guess is consistent. I'm a bird guy.